To quarter four. Quarter four, we made it. And the schedule worked out this way. I was the last teacher for quarter three on Sunday, and then I'm the first teacher for quarter four on Wednesday, so you guys are stuck with me twice. 3 times if you count my short Devo. But we are going to be beginning a series called Encounters with God. Now, Jeremy and Zach and I are going to be rotating teachers for this quarter. Zach and I will be alternating for the first couple months, then Jeremy's going to take the last 4, so you won't be stuck with me for the entire quarter, and that's probably good. But for our first lesson, we're going to be talking about Genesis chapter 18, and I already recognize a mistake, and I'm sorry. I'll get to it here in a minute. But Genesis chapter 18, we're going to be talking about Abraham and Sarah and their encounter with the Lord. The mistake is that when I started studying, I was like, all right, we're going to focus on the first 15 verses. But then I found a few other things that I wanted to focus on in verses 16 through 23. So it should say Genesis 18, 1 through 23, but it doesn't. So we're going to go ahead and read Genesis. You guys can go ahead and follow along with me. It will be on the screen, but we're going to read Genesis 18, 1 through 23. And then we'll dive into the class. Now the Lord appeared to him by the oaks of Mamre, while he was sitting at the tent door in the heat of the day. When he lifted up his eyes and looked, behold, 3 men were standing opposite him. And when he saw them, he ran from the tent door to meet them and bowed himself to the earth and said, My Lord, if now I have found favor in your sight, please do not pass your servant by. Please let a little water be brought and wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree, and I will bring a piece of bread that you may refresh yourselves. After that you may go on, since you have visited your servant. And they said, So do, as you have said. So Abraham hurried into the tent to Sarah and said, Quickly, prepare 3 measures of fine flour, knead it, and make it into bread cakes. Abraham also ran to the herd and took a tender and choice calf and gave it to the servant, and he hurried to prepare it. He took curds and milk and the calf which he had prepared and placed it before them, and he was standing by them under the tree as they ate. Then they said to him, Where is Sarah, your wife? And he said, There in the tent. He said, I will surely return to you at this time next year, and behold, Sarah, your wife, will have a son. And Sarah was listening at the tent door, which was behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in age. Sarah was past childbearing. Sarah laughed to herself, saying, After I have become old, shall I have pleasure, my Lord being old also? And the Lord said to Abraham, Why did Sarah laugh, saying, Shall I indeed bear a child when I am so old? Is anything too difficult for the Lord? At the appointed time I will return to you at this time next year, and Sarah will have a son. Sarah denied it, however, saying, I did not laugh, for she was afraid. And he said, No, but you did laugh. Then the men rose up from there and looked down toward Sodom, and Abraham was walking with them to send them off. The Lord said, Shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do? Since Abraham will surely become a great and mighty nation, and in him all nations of the earth will be blessed. For I have chosen him, so that he may command his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice, so that the Lord may bring upon Abraham what he has spoken about him. And the Lord said, The outcry of Sodom and Gomorrah is indeed great, and their sin is exceedingly grave. I will go down now and see if they have done entirely according to its outcry which has come to me. And if not, I will know. Then the men turned away from there and went toward Sodom, while Abraham was still standing before the Lord. Abraham came near and said, Will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? All right. So for the rest of the chapter, Abraham is talking with God about not sweeping away if he finds 50 righteous or 40 righteous or so on and so on down to 10, and then the Lord leaves. But I want to talk a little bit about the setting. So who, what, when, where, why, right? The setting of the passage that we just read. This is a wonderful encounter that we have. Not the only encounter Abraham has with God, but this is a wonderful encounter that we're studying today. First, I want to talk about the who. And I'm not going to get terribly detailed, but in the who, that is in verse 1, the Lord. And that is the Lord Jehovah or Yahweh. If we look in according to Strong's, this is not the Lord like, oh, my Lord the king or the duke or whomever is above you in title physically. This is the same word that the Lord used as his holy name in Exodus chapter 3 when he was revealing his name to Moses. It's the same word used by Moses here, writing about Abraham. And so it's the Lord God, the God is the who. Also, Abraham and Sarah. So God appears to Abraham and Sarah. He appeared by 3 men. Who are the 3 men? Man, that's a difficult question to answer. So the 3 men, are they angels? Are they messengers of God? Certainly they're messengers, right? Are they some kind of manifestation of the Trinity? There's 3 men, maybe, I don't know. What I believe from reading the rest of the passage, especially in those last few verses that we read, and then also in the first several verses of the next chapter 19, I believe that it's some kind of manifestation of God or the Son potentially, I guess, as Jesus as well. But then I believe there's 2 angels alongside him. If we look at the verses that we had just read in 18 verses 21 and 23, it says, I will go down now, this is God talking, and see if they have done entirely according to its outcry, which has come to me, and if not, I will know. Then the men turned away from there and went toward Sodom, while Abraham was still standing before the Lord. Abraham came near and said, will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? And so here, just like the 3 men and Abraham are walking down. They've eaten and refreshed themselves. They're walking down toward Sodom. And the 2 men continue, the 2 of the 3 continue on past them. And it says, Abraham stayed by the Lord. And it uses that same word that it used in verse 1 again, that he stayed with God. Now, then we go on and we look at the next chapter. In Genesis chapter 19, it says, now the 2 angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he rose to meet them and bowed down with his face to the ground. And then later in the same chapter, in 12 and 13, then the 2 men said to Lot, whom else have you here, a son-in-law, and your sons and your daughters, and whomever you have in the city? Bring them out of the place, for we are about to destroy this place, because of their outcry has become so great before the Lord, that the Lord has sent us to destroy it. And so it reads to me, we can't know for sure, and I don't think we need to know for sure, but it certainly reads to me like it was 2 angels and God. And the 2 angels continue, and God stays with Abraham, and then God's gone. But those 2 angels continue on down to Sodom and carry out the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah and the other cities of the valley, except for Zoar. Blake volunteered to be a runner for me. If anybody has any comments, please raise your hand, but let's hold your comments until Blake brings the mic to you. Yeah, Richard.
in Hebrews, the first chapter, it says that God spoke to the fathers in many portions and in many ways, or different kinds of ways. And two of the ways that God oftentimes interacts with human beings, since man cannot see God and live, he has to use some kind of method. And so he chooses to use two things. One is anthropomorphism, which is a God appearing as a man or as men. And so here you have two angels who appear first in 18, they appear as three men.
Right.
It's pretty, so the Greek word in the Septuagint would be anthropos, anthropos, and so a man. But then we find out later that he's talking to God. So anthropomorphically, God is appearing as a man. The other way God sometimes presents to man is theophany. God speaks to a man or speaks to humans through, say, like through the whirlwind or through a donkey. So he speaks theophonically. So thea, which is God, and phonai, which is to speak. So God speaks or God appears as a man.
Yeah.
So that's probably what's going on here.
Yeah.
I think.
And I agree. It just seems to be obvious that the men are unique. Yeah. Yeah, Shelby.
Just a question.
Yep.
Abraham automatically and instantly recognizes that this is God. How does he do that?
Yeah, man. I was trying to ask that exact same question to myself, because he obviously thinks it's special, but more than that, he knows who he's talking to, and we don't. I suppose it's one of those things that, man, for all we know, after he invited them to stay, he was told, and we don't have that recorded for us. But yeah, I don't know. What's that? Yeah, maybe a name tag. Yeah. But yeah, that's a good question, and it's one I wish I had the answer for, because I worked, a while to try to figure it out. Over here, Blake.
Well, it just kind of reminds me of when Jesus was with the apostles. They didn't know who he was because he didn't reveal himself. So my thinking is that God had revealed himself. That's how he knew, and that's the way I see it.
Yeah. I was thinking too that he might, this isn't the first time the Lord and Abraham have had an interaction. So there might have been some similarity of occurrence or appearance that Abraham picked up on. But we don't have that recorded either. Anything else before we moved on to what in the setting? All right. So what happened? So first, I think it's awesome. What is Abraham's reaction to the Lord appearing to him? And it is one of absolute extreme hospitality. Extreme hospitality that we should have as well. We can look at, it brings to mind a couple of verses for me. And I brought up two because it talks about us, one another, and it talks about us with strangers. And so we don't have any outs here, right? It's like either us or either people we don't know. But in Hebrews 13:2, it says, "Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for by this some have entertained angels without knowing it." 1 Peter 4, verse 9, "Be hospitable to one another without complaint." So hospitality is something that Abraham shows a great example of here, and he obviously knew it. At least after he got started, he knew it. But hospitality is godly and important, and we can find much support of it in Scripture. We're going to talk about what else happened later. I know there's more that happened, but I don't want to get into it until I cover a couple more points. Anything else? Any comments about this short here? I want to talk a little bit about where they were. And so we read that they were at the oaks of Mamre is where Abraham's tent was. Now, where are the oaks of Mamre? If we think about the oaks of Mamre, or the Mamre, that is very near Hebron. If you were in my class on Sunday morning, you heard us talking about Hebron, right? This is where David is crowned king over Judah. It's where David is also crowned king over the entire nation of Israel. It was the capital before Jerusalem of the nation of Israel. It's also one of the 3 cities that Joshua sets aside as a city for somebody that accidentally kills somebody but isn't a murderer that they can flee to. And so Hebron's an important city, and it starts off that way in the history of Israel, or of the descendants of Abraham. I love being able to connect dots of things that continue to be important and continue to be brought up throughout Scripture for generations of spread between. And so that's great. So Abraham's home is here in the Oaks of Mamre, very near Hebron. And if we look at Genesis chapter 13 and verse 18, this is when Abraham and Lot decide that they're too huge to live together anymore, right next to each other. Then Abram moved his tent and came and dwelt by the oaks of Mamre, which are in Hebron, and there he built an altar to the Lord. Where is it? It's in the mountains to the west of the Dead Sea, or the Salt Sea. It's mainly south, but just a little bit west of Jerusalem. And then also, just as an aside, I don't really think there's anything significant to this in the story, but don't you find it interesting that it talks about their tents? Abraham and Lot are both living in tents. Abraham continues to live in tents near Hebron, but not in a house in Hebron, right? And then it tells us tells us in 13 verse 12 of Genesis, Abram settled in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled in the cities of the valley and moved his tents as far as Sodom. And so his tents are next to Sodom. But then in chapter 19 verse 10, when the angels come into Sodom, he's now in a house. Right? I just find it interesting and worthy of me just pointing out, just because Abraham was continuing to be a sojourner, to be separate, right? He was continuing to live in tents and not have permanent dwellings, while Lot found himself maybe a bit more concretely tied to the sinful cities and sinful world where he was at. So just for picture reference for you, so in the lower right corner, it just looks at the whole country of Israel, and then it zooms in on that box where it's showing us. And this is now looking at what will in the future become the land of Judah. But this is showing you there that the body of water on the right, on the right is the Dead Sea, the Salt Sea, and then the mountains you can see up there, Mamre and Hebron, and notice the topography if you can. They are in the mountains, not down in the valley. All right. Comments about location. Anybody else find the location interesting? Why were they there? Why did they get visited? I think there's a couple reasons. So first of all, we read through the passage, and Abraham is promised a son, and he's promised a son through Sarah, that Sarah is going to have a son. But this is not the first promise. They are reaffirming, God is reaffirming the promise here to Abraham, but he's bringing a little bit more specificity. So in Genesis 15 and verse 4, it says, "Then behold, the word of the Lord came to him," that is Abraham, saying, "This man will not be your heir, but one who will come forth from your own body. He shall be your heir." So Abraham is going to have a son to be his heir when he is complaining that, "I don't have any children, so anybody born in my house, he is my heir." And this is the Lord promising him a son. In 17, verses 15 and 16, it says, Then God said to Abraham, As far as for Sarai, your wife, you shall not call her name Sarai anymore, but Sarah shall be her name. I will bless her, and indeed I will give you a son by her. Then I will bless her, and she shall be a mother of nations. Kings of peoples will come from her. So first, in 15, Abraham's going to have a son. Then builds a little bit more specificity. Abraham's going to have a son with Sarah. And then in 18, verses 10, he said in the passage that we read, I will surely return to you at this time next year, and behold, Sarah, your wife, will have a son. So continuing to be Abraham and Sarah, but now within a year, right? So each promise just gets a little bit more specific in Abraham being promised a son. The other why. He's also coming down to go to Sodom and Gomorrah and the other cities of the valley to see if their outcry is as bad as what they say. In the passage that we read, so we're going to look at verse 17. We'll skip down to the second half of 20 through 21. The Lord said, Shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do? The outcry of Sodom and Gomorrah is indeed great, and their sin is exceedingly grave. I will go down now and see if they have done entirely according to its outcry, which has come to me. And if not, I will know. We do not know the exact location of Sodom and Gomorrah with any kind of certainty. So this is an approximation. That's why the question marks are on there. Oh, whoops. But if we look at, remembering the map where they are in Mamre and Hebron, up in the mountains there to the west of the Dead Sea, and it comes down, and in the description in the passage it says they're walking and they are looking towards Sodom. Well, why are they looking towards Sodom? Because Sodom's in the valley and they're up on the mountains, so they can see down into the valley, right, for a great distance. And so we think about where they are headed. We know the general location of where they were based on passages when Abraham and Lot are splitting in chapter 13 of Genesis. It talks about the valley that Lot chose, so he went towards Gomorrah, right? So he is down in the valley of the Jordan, is what we're told. And we know it was on that disc somewhere in there near the Salt Sea in the valley, near the other. There's 5 cities of the valley that were condemned. All but one of them were destroyed. All 5 of them are going to be destroyed, but then Lot convinces the angels to let him go to the little city. So they let that one stick around. So what else? So the other stuff that happened. Sarah laughs. Says she laughs to herself. Did you catch that? So I'm pretty nervous about that. She laughed to herself. Even to herself, she's not alone, is she? Our thoughts are not our own, right? When we think we no one else hears, somebody hears. And it's God. So Sarah laughed to herself, saying, After I have become old, shall I have pleasure, my Lord being old also. And we give Sarah, and especially in this passage, she gets the grief, even being called out by God, that she laughed. But we need to remember that Abraham laughed first. So in Genesis 17 through 20, Abraham fell on his face and laughed and said in his heart, Will a child be born to a man 100 years old? And will Sarah, who is 90 years old, bear a child? And to Abraham, God said, I added a couple words. And Abraham said to God, I said those in the wrong order, so it sounded different. Oh, that Ishmael might live before you. But God said, no. But Sarah, your wife, will bear you a son, and you shall call his name Isaac. And I will establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant for his descendants after him. As for Ishmael, I have heard you. Behold, I will bless him and will make him fruitful and will multiply him exceedingly. And he shall become the father of 12 princes, and I will make him a great nation. Isaac means, I'm not great at conjugation for Hebrew, okay? So Isaac means laughter, or he laughs, or he will laugh, from my noticings of it. But it's funny that Abraham laughed first, and I have a hard time believing he's so excited about talking to these three men. He seems to know they're special, right? But he's so excited about talking to these three men. I have to imagine that he's also talking to his wife a lot. He probably told his wife this story, right? That God told me that we're going to have a son. And you know what I did? I laughed. So God told me that we're going to name him Laughter, right? But then Sarah still laughs when she hears it sometime later. So anyway, I just have a hard time believing that didn't happen, that he didn't tell his wife that information. But she can't help it. She's so, whether she doesn't believe or whether she's scared to believe, she's so excited that it just comes out as a laughter because she just can't even bear to think about it, something that she's wanted her whole life. But regardless, she can't help it, even though she, I would say, almost certainly knew Abraham laughed. She laughs too. Any comments that I'm skipping over? I'm not very good at asking for comments. I get told that a bunch. Please just shoot your hand up if you ever have a comment. I will continue to ask when I remember. But notice the question God asks after Sarah laughs in verse 14. Is anything too difficult for the Lord? Makes me think of Mary when she's told that she's going to have a son. That's in Luke 35 through 37. The angel answered and said to her, "The Holy Spirit will come upon you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. And for that reason, the holy child shall be called the Son of God. And behold, even your relative Elizabeth has also conceived a son in her old age, and she who is called barren is now in her 6th month, for nothing will be impossible with God." What is too difficult for God, right? Rhetorical question. Nothing is too difficult for God. But man, when we are living in this world and we are smacked in the face with physical limitations every day, it is hard for us to get our minds wrapped around things that seem impossible that we don't even bother thinking about not being impossible for God, right? I think that's both Sarah and Mary, what they're going through. Also, I think Abraham really could have used hearing what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 3 and verse 9, when he said, "And do not suppose that you can say to yourselves, we have Abraham for our father, for I say to you that from these stones God is able to raise up children to Abraham," right? That nothing is impossible for God. You want a few years to be too difficult for God? I'm telling you, I don't even need something organic. I can make kids out of stones, out of rocks, right? And then also Mark chapter 10 and verse 27. Is anything too difficult for God? Well, Jesus says, looking at them, Jesus said, "With people it is impossible, but not with God, for all things are possible with God. This is Jesus talking about it being easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than a rich man to get into heaven. And again, it seems impossible. How can somebody that lives their physical life not having to depend on anybody but themselves, how can they depend wholly on God and get into heaven? Well, you know what? They can't. But through God, it's not impossible. They can't do it on their own. You're right. But with God, nothing is impossible. This is probably the point. This is the slide that I had like 14 places I wanted to go, and I made myself narrow it down to 3. But what can you guys think of? What seemingly impossible things have you guys gone through or witnessed others going through that it just stands as a stark reminder for you that, man, nothing's impossible for God? Yeah, Shelby?
I absolutely agree that nothing is impossible with God, but we also have to understand that the only thing that's possible with God is what he wills. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we may wonder, things happen in our lives, maybe you wonder, God, you can change this, but it's not his will to change that. It's not that it's not possible for him. It's just that it's not part of his will, and there's a purpose for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good point. Anything else? Is there a hand over here? Yeah. Jeremy.
I think that this whole lesson here, talking about nothing's too hard for God, and what was said prior about the story of just how Sarah and Abraham had to wait, and to Shelby's point, that's right, nothing is impossible for God. We know that, and sometimes even in our own lifetime, we don't see the answers to our prayers happen. But I think as a congregation here, we've seen within this last year so many things that we have lifted up to God in prayer and just fervently prayed hard, and we've seen things happen. And not that those things, I guess what I would say is whether you believe in miracles or not, if there were no such thing, then why would God say, ask and it'll be given to you? So many times we don't knock, and that's why we don't get the things we need, because we just don't ask. Maybe because we think, no, this situation is just hopeless. This is too hard. But we just need to remember that nothing is too hard for God, and we need to learn to wait on God.
Yeah. Anything else?
And I think in addition to that, we need to respect what we learn from the answer to that. Is it yes? Is it no? Whatever it is, respect it.
Yeah. Yeah, especially, it's especially difficult when we are going through something and we have the faith that nothing is impossible for God, like what Shelby was saying, but we still go through the valley or the difficulty, or it doesn't get solved for us. Then our faith can certainly be harmed, because we're thinking, God, isn't my comfort one of your main priorities? Right? And I think we don't actually say that or even think that out loud, but sometimes when we look back on the way that we were thinking or feeling, I have a hard time assigning my own selfish thoughts any other way. That, man, why did I think I was such a priority for God myself selfishly? Right? We are all a priority for our Lord, but his priority for us is that we get to be with him eternally, not our pleasure and comfort physically on this earth. Yeah.
Well, I think this is really kind of cool, because this kind of popped up in my Facebook feed. It was a scene from Chosen, and I can't remember. He was asking him, Lord, you said I can go out and heal, but I'm still limping. Why haven't you healed me yet? and people aren't going to believe me. And what he said, and I'd have to look this up. I don't know if Jesus said this or whatever, but it was very accurate that he didn't want to heal him yet because he wanted him to be a witness that he will still praise and love the Lord even when he's limping. Even when there's struggles, he is still praising the Lord. And he says more people will be in awe by that than if you heal 1 million people. They will be amazed. And I think that's like with God and our struggles. You know, we have these struggles, but if we're still showing the world praising God, you know, then it's important, you know, but it may not feel that way. It may feel like this is horrible. I don't want to go through this, you know, but maybe it's God saying, you know what, I want you to praise me in this storm.
Yep. No, that's great. Right behind you, Blake. Zach, discussing.
I was just going to say, like, I think it's really cool the relationship that we see God having with his people in the Old Testament, especially in Genesis. Like, often I think we get stuck in this idea of like God's will and we battle with his will and how it relates to our lives and the outcomes of our lives. But when you look at Abraham and his relationship with God, we see even later on when he intercedes for Sodom, him having a dialogue with God, trying to convince him and changing his mind and you know, working with God to get to a resolution. And then, you know, we even see throughout this whole, you know, passage, you even had it up earlier where God essentially says, you know, I'm going to have to go down to Sodom and see if it's really as bad as I think it is, as I'm hearing the outcry, right? So I just think that's really important here. Like when Abraham is having this dialogue with these people that came to his tent that is effectively God, right? And then later on when he intercedes for Sodom, like it's a very active type of relationship. And I think that there's something that we can learn from that too today.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, the omniscience of God, you know, that he knows everything. Did God have to go down to know? No, he knew. But I think it was good for Abraham to see that, man, God is taking an active role in our groanings, right? He is going to make sure to audit our prayers or the outcry for those wronged or what it might be. So I think it was neat for Abraham to know that, yeah, we're here, but we're here on our way to do something else, you know, to go down to Sodom. But I also think it's important to know that God works in unexpected ways. We, especially today, you know, I know there's a few other times like this in Genesis when God is appearing to people. But for us today, when we look at this, it is strange. It is unexpected. We do not expect God to be showing up at a tent door to go figure out a problem. And I think it's important for us to know that God's thoughts are higher than ours, and we don't know all of his thoughts, and his ways are unexpected and mysterious. Let's see, got on the wrong slide here. So I want to remind us of a couple things. Man, I'm going to be done a couple minutes early. I want to remind us of a couple things, a couple passages in Hebrews 13:2. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for by this some have entertained angels without knowing it. And then also in Matthew 25 and verse 40, the king will answer and say to them, truly I said to you, to the extent that you did it to one of these brothers of mine, even to the least of them, you did it to me. And so it's, man, hospitality is so important. Showing grace and mercy and welcoming and kindness to not only our Christian brothers and sisters, but also to strangers and to the world is important. So, oh yeah.
I was just going to say in John chapter 10, the Jews confront Jesus and they pick up stones to stone him, and he said, "For what good work am I being stoned?" He said, "No, we're stoning you because you're a man and you claim to be God." Of course, they were right that men can't become God, but this scripture shows that God can become men. And who is it that Jacob wrestled with but God, a God who became men?
Yeah.
So they were trying to.
So, if you want to read, and not read ahead, but if you wanted to read like in the past, previous 2 chapters, there you go. Genesis 16 will be the class next week. Thank you, guys.